Early on the morning of July 2nd, 1853, a Japanese fisherman reported a strange sight.
I was told there were ships on fire. I ran up the mountain to get a good look. The ships came nearer and nearer until the shape of them showed us they were not Japanese ships, but foreign. And what we had taken for a conflagration on sea was really the black smoke rising out of their smokestacks.
Steamships, like most Western innovations, were unknown in Japan. Now there were 4 in the harbor. The American squadron, armed with cannons and almost 1,000 men, was ready to force its way onto Japanese shores. Japan was a land shrouded in mystery, a warrior society ruled by the powerful Tokugawa shogunate. They had successfully kept the West at bay for over 200 years. But now the Western powers demanded entry. Could the samurai nation repel the industrial might of a determined West? These are the memoirs of Japan's secret empire.
All those who are in contact with us are bound by an oath and signed with their blood not to talk or entrust to us information about the situation of their country, their religion, and secrets of government.
So reported the German doctor Engelbert Kempfer, one of the few Europeans allowed in Japan. It was the year 1690, and the Japanese viewed Westerners as barbarians who threatened their orderly society. The Japanese were determined to keep their doors closed to the West for as long as they could. There was one exception, a small settlement of Dutch traders who agreed to live in confinement on an island in Nagasaki harbor. For over 200 years, this sequestered trading post would be Europe's only window to this impenetrable land. The Dutch East Indies Company sent Dr. Kempfer to provide medical care for the Dutch community. He was also asked to gather information about the everyday life of the Japanese. It would not be an easy task.
We are strictly and strongly guarded from the inside and the outside by various guards treating us not like honest men, but like criminals, traitors, spies, prisoners, or to say the least, hostages of the shogun. This jail goes by the name of Dejima.
The Dutch lived like prisoners on Dejima. But Kempfer was fascinated by the opportunity to write about something nobody else could get access to.
Dejima was tiny. Kempfer counted 236 steps across and 82 wide. There were never more than 19 men allowed on the island at a time, and never any Western women. Far from home, the men did what they could to transform the unfamiliar Japanese-style buildings into a little touch of Holland. They placed chairs and high tables on the woven grass mats, replaced futons with poster beds, and insisted on being served Dutch food rather than eating Japanese. No Japanese, except for prostitutes, were allowed unsupervised contact with the Dutch. Yet, in order to gather information for his reports, Kempfer managed to create a small group of inadvertent Japanese informants.
I serve them willingly and without charge in my profession with medicines, while cordially serving them European liqueurs. I question them about local matters, nature and secular and spiritual topics, with total freedom.
The Japanese were as inquisitive as Kempfer. The Dutch settlement was their window to the exotic world of the West. But the trickle of information that arrived from overseas was carefully guarded.
Every time a Dutch ship arrived, the Dutch ship would have the latest news from Europe, and that news would be given to the Dutch authorities in Nagasaki, and then that news would be translated into Japanese and rushed immediately to the headquarters of the shogun.
The ruler of Japan, the shogun, hungered for news of the outside world. He commanded the Westerners to present themselves at his castle once a year.
The only time Kempfer really saw Japan was when he traveled from Nagasaki to Edo, which was the shogun's capital.
The road trip to Edo gave Kempfer revealing glimpses into the world of the Japanese. He recorded every detail of his month-long trip.
We receive many of the honors that are generally shown to the provincial lords. The roads are swept with brooms and water to keep the dust down. In the houses bordering the road, people kneel behind the blinds, watching our procession in profound silence. An incredible number of people daily use the highways of Japan's provinces. Indeed, at certain times of the year, they are as crowded as the streets of a populous European city. The reason for these crowds is partly that the Japanese travel more often than other people.
Kempfer would write about all of the travelers: samurai and their lords called daimyo, merchants and roadside performers, Buddhist monks, and a group of young women who dressed like nuns.
They cover their shorn heads with silk hoods and adorn themselves nicely. Each attaches herself to one particular traveler, starts up a rustic tune, and as long as it's to her advantage, she accompanies and amuses him for several hours.
As the road traffic grew, so did the number of merchants who catered to the travelers' needs.
We saw many fine stalls, those of merchants and cloth dealers, medicine dealers, traders in idols, booksellers, glass blowers, pharmacists, and people crying out their wares. There are countless humble inns, roadside food stalls, sake or beer taverns, cake and sweet stalls along our road. Outside tables also have a variety of biscuits of different colors and shapes on display. They are pretty to look at, but are generally so tough that it is difficult to move one's teeth if one attempts to chew them.
Tradesmen, once considered social parasites, were beginning to improve their position in Japanese society. Successful street peddlers became roadside merchants, who would eventually build bigger stores and even move to the cities.